If you're new here, I am a fashion design student who's about to graduate, and in this little 3-part series I'm showing everything that went into our degree assessment. Now keep in mind this assessment was very different than it was supposed to be, so I decided to just talk every detail through and show you everything that went into it. In the previous 2 videos that already are up on my channel, I talked about generally like every little detail and technical drawings in specifics, and then a full tour of my second degree collection sketchbook. I'm going to be leaving them up in the clickable I button and down below as well, and also I'll link my first semester A degree collection sketchbook because it also makes sense to watch them in order. Now, I do suggest that you watch those videos first, just because it will make a little bit more logical transition from one to another, because in my sketchbook you can see like the thought process going from start to finish, especially if you watch 2 in a row. And then in my assessment video you can kind of generally see what the collection ended up being like. And then portfolio, what I'm going to be showing you today, is like an ending little finishing touch to everything. So this is a cleaner version of everything I've submitted, a cleaner version of everything that I made during this degree collection. And in general, if you are on a roll to watch this collection play out from the beginning, you can actually watch my degree collection playlist, because it already has about, I think, like 13 different videos, and you'll see textile development, print development, different techniques that I used along the way, a lot of studio vlogs. And because of that corona situation, we're currently not actually physically making anything. On the 22nd of June, so on Monday, we are actually allowed to access the studio. Now the funny part of it is that I'm in Estonia, not in Moscow where the studio is, so I can't really access it anymore. I'm going to have to find a way to make my collection remotely, and I'm going to be looking for different co-working spaces in Tallinn, so maybe if you know, just leave them down below. But let's get into the video.
We'll begin with the first page of my portfolio, which I'm absolutely in love with. It's essentially a scan of my old passport. I tweaked the stamp and added a couple of new ones, and I changed the wording and numbers everywhere. So on the bottom left, in the light blue ink, you can see my name and surname, and before that I think it said something like location, numbers, or something logical for the passport to have. Then all the stamps apart from the oval one on the left side of the page are original ones from that passport, which I just changed the numbers in. So I had to make the same font. I didn't want to bother actually googling and finding a font that would work for those specific stamps that they had already inside. So I just decided to make my own alphabet for each stamp. So on the top left, I think before that it said Copenhagen, because I had a transit flight like a couple of years ago there. I changed the wording to say Moscow BHSAD because it's my university and location. Then the numbers themselves I changed to our assessment deadline, which was June 1st. Then the square stamp on the right side of the page, I also changed the numbering to the deadline day, so June 1st again. But then what it says on the top of that little stamp area with wording, it's not exactly visible, but I decided to keep it the same as it is, because in some areas it's like worn down and you can't really see the lettering, which does make sense to my project. But the words that you do see also are sort of connected to my work, so leave, public, employ, whatever that says, but it is sort of rubbed out, and I do like the aesthetic of it, especially how the ink is transferred unevenly. It's just gorgeous. Then what you see, the perforated lettering and numbering on the top of that page, is our module code for the project. The only thing that is left on that page is my stamp that I made from other documents, because in the beginning of the project, even before I knew what the project would be about, I scanned all of my family's documents, and in a couple of those I found this beautiful oval stamp. So I used the same font that was there before, but just changed it to say neither or both, which is the title of the project, and added some lettering, some wording like right in the middle, neither one nor the other, which is the wording from my original stamp, which I used to make a liner cut print out of for the actual project. Now this is the page with my rationale, essentially an explanation of the entire project, and I'm going to read it out to you. What makes up a person? Is it the name, nationality, their age, or place of birth? The answer will vary depending on context, but in formal settings, these tend to be the defining factors. This collection aims to express an overwhelming nature of bureaucracy through the exploration of ambiguous airport security measures, formality, and restrictions. Airport acts as a transitional point where one is expected to put on their formal identity, thus distorting their own self-image, creating a middle ground between the two. With each identity becoming a lesser version of itself, is the new identity neither or both at the same time? To all the formal elements that come with air travel, such as passport control, visas, and registration blanks, there is an opposing, very revealing and intrusive side of full-body scans and pat-downs. Security measures are reducing people down to numbers, simultaneously putting every inch of their bodies on display. In this collection, the intrusive exposure is reflected in body prints, tight silhouettes, and drapery, visualizing the process of security check undressing. Additional elements of paper clips, perforation, and passport page numbers are extruded from document archiving and preservation research. The opposing control and restrictions are expressed through archetypal elements of formal wear, such as jackets, shirts, and tight pencil skirts, alongside surface manipulations and finishings like pleating, sharp corners, and clean lining. We abide the restrictions and follow the rules until we mess up a 5th plank in a row, cross it all out in frustration, tear it, crumble it, only to take a new one and repeat the cycle all over again, drowning in paperwork. This bureaucracy overload is represented through chaotic silhouette, print, raw edges, layering and crumbling, whilst the idea of identity distortion is showcased through interrupted document scans, paper discoloration, imperfect stamps, and wavy seams. Alongside natural fabrics, the collection utilizes principles of zero waste in pattern cutting and recycling in textiles. Element of handcraft is expressed through linocut, monoscreen sublimation, and leather transfer printing, blending physical and digital worlds together in a layered, controlled chaos. Now that you've heard my rationale and explanation, I hope it makes a little bit more sense as to what the collection is about, even if you haven't watched the previous videos like I suggested, so we can move on. In this page, you can see a little bit of that inspiration and words that you just heard me say, because I made my own blank, and I am using that blank in look number 6 and look number 4, so I had to make my own vector version, because if I were to blow up a giant existing blank, which is essentially made an A4 size, it would be very pixelated and not look professional, so I had to make my own version, and obviously because I could make my own version with adding any wording into it, I decided to customize it. It's not that interesting, just the same words that you just saw: bureaucracy, paperwork, identity distortion, but my favorite thing in this blank was the fact that I disrupted the word disruption. So because I'm using it in my collection, I decided to just write it down the same way as a blank would be, but blank would typically have different words in those slots where I added disruption, but mine is disrupted. I absolutely love it. I think I'm just hyping myself up too much, but I love this little section, and you'll see it used a bit later on in my commercial diffusion range plan. This is my one and actually only mood board for this portfolio, and on the bottom right you can see a scan of my old worn down passport, and I absolutely love the traces of the hands that you can see in the background there, because it is adding an organic element to otherwise very structured and very formal detail that I'm scanning. Then you can see a body scan from front and back, and then the actual scanning process where you can see a crowd of people, then a pat down, a bit of passport photos of my family members, then an old, some kind of old random document that I was scanning, but I added in here because I love the amount of ink on the page and the amount of signatures that you can see repeated, which I also utilized in one of the looks later on. Then another formal document of my dad's, which has some stamps in there, a tiny little paper clip, and then what you'll see throughout this whole portfolio is the way that I'm trying to unite it by using a font and a blank sort of inspired way of laying out my lettering. I guess that was a very long explanation, I'm sorry, but on the bottom left you basically can see that. So I was trying to make a blank every time I was writing something about the collection. So in here you can see inspiration and starting points written in a typeface, and then everything else handwritten on a graphic tablet. So I wrote security check, frustration, stamps, document scans, formal passport photography, undressing, registration blanks. I was using multiple ways of writing by my own hand as well on the graphic tablet, so in some areas I tried to imitate an area where you would typically add your signature, which will be kind of frilly and in cursive. This is the uniting factor for the entire portfolio, and this is what makes multiple different pages look a little bit more cohesive. So if you are working on portfolio, I suggest you find that portfolio DNA or that logic behind portfolio construction, which would make sense to your collection, and then work around it, because I think that was the first thing that made my portfolio look logical, cohesive, and beautiful. And for that I have Alina, our graphic design tutor, to thank, because she had multiple tutorials with us where she was actually giving us suggestions, multiple different suggestions as to how we could make our portfolio the best way possible. So thank you so much, Alina. This is quite self-explanatory, my color palette page. I decided to just add a little mood board for the colors and the aesthetic of the color palette that I wanted to use, and then on the bottom you can see the actual colors that I chose for the collection. It seems like it's too much, but because I'm using a lot of print, there are multiple shade variations, so you can see that. And also I've written a little code down below for each color. It's not the code that you would typically see. For each color you can see that I added L, and then you see a bunch of numbers. For the gray on the left you can see L1, which means look number 1, and then 30. So look number 1 has 30% of this color in it, look number 4 has 50%, look number 6 has 70%, and so on. So I decided to make my own code for every color so that it would make sense to me. I just like to add those little finishing touches for every detail, which might not be noticed by anyone but me, but I just know that everything has a little finishing touch in it. This is a surface and print manipulation mood board, so you can see techniques such as draping, pleating, top stitched patchwork, layering, sublimation printing, water soaked, genuine leather transfer, which I'll talk a bit later on about, lino cut printing under heat press. So I just made a little mood board. It's quite self-explanatory, a couple of photos, a couple of techniques that I used along the way. This is my first of the two fabrication mood boards. You can see that on the inspiration image on the left I altered the wording a little bit because it said something different in Estonian, and on the right again I made sort of like a blank inspired version of fabric choice presentation. This is the second page of the fabrication mood board, and in here I just showed the two different leather types that I used. So I used a recycled genuine leather and suede, obviously the other side as well. This page is showcasing two techniques that went into the core DNA of my collection. They are layering and distressing. The left side with that layered shoulder pad out of recycled fabrics, which Lisa helped me make, my level 4 helper, is essentially a representation in multiple looks of those two techniques. But then layering itself is the main technique I think I used in the whole entire collection. I think it goes into every look, and I absolutely love it how it is represented on the right side of that page. Again, that old worn down passport which got washed in the washing machine the day before my dad and I had to fly. Then also multiple layered photos of my mum's in a plastic sleeve, which are just layered on top of that passport, again showcasing that layering and raw edges. I love this page. I'm not the biggest fan of this finishing and detail page, but what I love about it is how I worked around with the existing documents. Again, I changed the wording on them, and I don't think any examiner is going to notice, but I'm going to know that my passport does no longer say my name or date of birth. It says the name of my collection for name and surname, the date of birth of this collection, so assessment deadline, and the date of expiry is where I made that this is never ending, it will never expire, the collection will always be relevant, which is obviously not the case. But I also changed the wording on that little background detail that you see. It says fabric covered buttons and look number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc., and also perforated lettering in raw edges and perforation. Then next page is stamp print mood board. This is sort of like a core detail that I'm adding throughout different looks as a finishing touch. On the right you can actually see my first lino cut stamp print, which I then distorted on a scanner, and on the left you can see the actual print which got printed out and then cut on lino and then printed. So a lot of process went into this, and it is expressing layering idea as well. You can see all of my lino cut print distortions over here. I printed on leather, I printed on 2 types of cotton, I printed on calico, and also you can see the actual lino cut piece that I just also distorted. I love it. Even though I did not use this as a print, I think it brings out a lot of inspiration and mood into my project. Now we're finally on to the actual design development process. So this is look number 1, trousers, the bottoms, and I want to talk about the left side of that page because this is absolutely my favorite detail. I'll talk about how the print was made, even though I mentioned that in my previous sketchbook tour regardless. So I scanned my distorted worn down passport alongside multiple other documents. I arranged them in a plaid formation by being inspired by my mother's jacket, which represents formality and restrictions and order. So I made a plaid, I printed it out on a piece of paper and distorted it on a scanner by lifting the piece of paper. Then I printed this out again and I pleated it, and that's how the right pant leg of the trousers was born. I made it quite early on in semester B, and I didn't use it for the longest time because I wasn't sure whether or not it's like strong enough, if that works well for me, but I am absolutely in love with it. I'm super happy that I'm using it, and I think the amount of process that went into this is the best representation of my favorite type of work. On the bottom right you can also see my mother's high school photo, and what I wrote alongside it is pleating inspired by the formality of school uniforms in this collection opposes structure and restrictions with playfulness and youth. Another uniting factor for this portfolio visual representation was the use of those imperfect squiggly arrows, and I love their connection to the frustration that they're bringing. I think they're adding that frustrating element to otherwise very digital looking portfolio. This page is representing top print development, and not just for look number 1 but also look number 3 and 6. As you can see, I wrote underneath those circled out tops. On the bottom right you can see the body scan inspiration, and you can read what I wrote in here. Also a technical drawing on the right and a blown up version of that body print with a bust very prominently on the page. It is low enough in opacity not to take up too much of our attention, but it is bringing the trousers to the top together in a cohesive look. In this page you can see the development of a skirt from look number 2. You can see a close-up of my patchwork from recycled leather, then also the debossing effect that I tried out on that leather, and the genuine leather transfer, which I actually randomly discovered when our digital printer was not working. I just had to find a way for me to play around with print a little more, so I was absolutely glad for that little experiment to work out that well. The shape inspiration for that look came from formality and restrictions, but also from a cut-off edge of a passport, which you get usually when your passport is expired. The paperclip debossing actually came from the idea that every time when I'm traveling to Russia, I get the migration document and then my registration, which I also have to carry around with me with my passport all the time if I'm in Russia somewhere. So I usually attach it with a paperclip and also because our passports in Europe are red, I use genuine leather, which reminded me the passport cover, so debossing that paperclip effect on top of that passport cover only made sense for me because my little uniting paperclip usually leaves a little bit of a trace of itself on top of my passport cover, so I just love that effect. And on that skirt I am placing them as if they are falling inside of your pocket, so this little extension also acts as a pocket, and the lining of it is that genuine leather print transfer, so it all is united. For the top of look number 2, I was inspired by passport photography in the formal clothing that you usually put on, or that you would put on in a more conservative time, like in the Soviet Union, for example. And I was asking a couple of my friends and my friends' friends to send me their old passport photos or the ones they could find. I got a lot of like grandma, granddad photos, which was perfect because I found exactly what I was looking for, and that was a formal shirt collar, which in this case as an applique, trompe-l'oeil, fake shirt that you put on top of yourself, as if you're trying to conceal your real identity with a formal version of yourself. And it also is creased, inspired by the little scanner experiment that you see on the background, and the creasing is also uniting look number 1 trousers on the bottom with the top of look number 2. Even though they're quite different and the looks don't really make much sense just together, they are united by little techniques such as this one. This page is a little bit more technical. It is showing how the top is actually constructed and how it looks like by itself, and also it gives a little bit of a hint for the top for look number 3. It's actually not giving a hint, it's quite straightforwardly showing what look number 3 top is looking like, but I didn't really want to make another separate page for look number 3 top, and I felt like just uniting them in here would make a little bit more sense. The semi-transparent jersey top is the base for that little trompe-l'oeil shirt that I was talking about, and it is made in a nude body print, which you saw just a couple of pages back. Look number 2 is accessorized by a giant backpack with a lot of extensions, and I'm trying to showcase an overwhelming nature of bureaucracy and the amount of paperwork that you have to carry to travel from one place to another if they're not like European borders. So I was inspired by airport carry-on backpacks that people travel with because they're usually so enormously large and like so obnoxious. So I just wanted to show this overwhelming nature of paperwork by being very straightforward and very obvious with the amount of papers that you have. And a lot of those details go into extensions, and on the left you can see the prints that I'm using for this look, and on the right you can see a sketch that I actually began my first sketchbook with, I think. So this idea has been with me from the start of that project. This is a more technical representation of that backpack, so it's broken down into layers, and the inspiration for the backpack came from the carry-on backpack, so I just took a very straightforward drawing which I redrew myself and kind of tweaked a little bit, and the extensions go inside those seams, and then the backpack is acting as a regular backpack. Now we're on to look number 3, and this page specifically is dedicated to the trousers themselves because the top I've already talked about. Those are sculptural high-waisted trousers with layered documents, paperwork overload representation, and multiple shades of cream linen. The sketch that you see on the right is also from my first sketchbook, and even though this look doesn't really have that top extension that you can see here, the bottom does look relatively similar because I was essentially utilizing the technique we call masterclass just because we had a project like this, but essentially it means that you have a sketch and you start creating it in 3 dimensions right away, so without any middle points. This technique allows you to be very creative, and in my case it worked perfectly because I essentially found the shape for the trousers from the start, and it just had to tweak them a little bit regarding the construction for the final piece. But that's it. I am absolutely in love with the trousers, and on the next page you can see the technical drawing for the front and the back, another inspiration image for the different shades of linen that came from here, different finishings and maybe print little details, and on the right you can see the actual liner cut stamp which I'm adding to the trousers on the back. Then also a blue line that is crossing the page is actually inspired by the passport of Estonia that you saw on the first page, and it is going across the pleats on the left side of the look because it is representing the fact that the blue line goes across multiple pages in a passport, and this way I'm also adding a number of the passport page inside of it. On the red passport pages you can actually see a little oval with a page number on the left, which I'm also placing on the trousers on some of the pages, so to speak, on some of the little extensions that I'm adding on them for extra numbering and for extra passport references. Now this is a process page for look number 4. On the left you can see a bunch of experiments with a coat that I tried on. On the right you can see an illustrated version of the 4 of my favorite experiments in here, and on the next page you can see an actual developed version of that look on the back. On the left side of that page you can see a distorted blank which became an inspiration for the curved seams on the back of that look, and on the right you can see the inspiration point for that look and that experiment with the coat in general. So I was looking into security check undressing, airport pat downs, how right after that security check you have to sort of throw on your clothing quite quickly so that the next person can go through through, and your clothing is usually not in perfect condition and pieces are misplaced. So that is why this coat has an extra draping coat coming from the hip extension, and also a lot of paperwork coming again. It's not just to unite it with different looks, but also to represent this chaos, I guess, that is happening on that security check. You have to throw on your jacket, you have to take your passports, you have to take another bag and everything. So everything is mixed up together, and it is representing the chaos. And the drapery with pleating, with multiple different colors, multiple prints, multiple hemline lengths as well, I think is the best representation of that idea for this look specifically. On the left side, you can see an illustration of a bodysuit, which is in this look printed with leather transfer print, and it goes underneath the vest coat, and the look consists of just 2 pieces. Now we're on to look number 5, which just consists of 1 piece, and it is inspired by security check undressing again, but with another experiment. So I did this experiment, I think, in even the first semester, but I really liked how the underwear, but in this case swimwear lines, are coming through, and I wanted to represent them somehow. On the right, you can see my first attempts at a body scan print, but then you can see how my underwear line experiment is evolving with this experiment that I did just randomly, passing through a mirror and wearing a giant t-shirt dress. I tucked this t-shirt into high-waisted underwear lines, and I wanted to make them very prominent, very visible and obvious. And I love the drapery because it is uniting with other looks again, but it also is showing the amount of fabric that you're wearing, which is not visible on a scanner. For this look specifically, I was placing a print on top of folds so that the print would be interrupted. And I love the look because it is representing multiple things at the same time. It's showing formality with a formal collar line. It's showing drapery and softness of your clothing when you're sort of like roughly quickly putting it back on. You can see the underwear lines, which are representative of that x-ray, which is showing everything that you're wearing, and also that obvious very naked body print that goes on top to show your full body. I love the clash of every thought in this project, in this look specifically, because it is showing both formality and revealing very intrusive body scan prints and body pat downs and everything at the same time. This look consists of multiple layers of transparent fabric, and it is dynamic in movement, or at least will be once I try to sew it, so fingers crossed that I'll make it, because for me, for now, it's one of my favorite ones in this collection. Design development for look number 5 is naturally evolving for look number 6, because I translated a couple of techniques to look number 6 underlayer. So the underlayer consists of printed and tucked high-waisted leggings and a printed simple top, and the leggings themselves, you can see a clear reference for look number 5's technique for tucking the underwear lines. They're constructed in a bit of a different manner, but for this look I also used a paperclip as an accessory and giant padded shoulder pads for actual stability and providing a little bit more formality element, as you can see on the next page. In here is a back of that look, and it's an oversized dress with a very long train with a very large extension over the head with my print that you saw on page number 2 in the beginning of the project. The shape inspiration for this look is a blank with frustration marks, which in this case would be crossing out or very imperfectly placed stamps. I wanted for this look to be very obviously overwhelming, giant, too big to handle, imperfect, with curved seams on the back repeating look number 4. This blank is also printed on those areas on the back and the front, but then you can obviously see the reverse side of that page, how you would naturally see the blank page as well. It is printed sort of greyish on one side and completely clean and white on the other. I love those little details as well, and on the final version I actually have little perforations going alongside the bottom of that dress to represent that finishing and detail page that you saw a bit earlier on. This blank and this experiment I actually did quite early on in semester B, and I wasn't exactly sure about it, but I absolutely loved the area where the head goes through on the mannequin. As you can see, I essentially tore a giant hole, and then those little rips I turned into lapels. I ripped through the actual blank, and then those torn areas I turned into lapels by finishing them with lining on a sample. I like it, I think it looks pretty interesting, but on the final version I had those lapels be very extended, very like folding. I'm not sure how that's going to look on the final piece when I actually sew it and construct it, but stay tuned for that, it's going to come later on. And now that I've explained everything, here's my range plan from the front. From the first glance, it might look very chaotic and not cohesive enough, but when you look further, you can see how everything is merged together. A lot of things are repeated, a lot of shapes are repeated, and hemlines are quite similar, so I'm going to talk you through a little bit. So on the look number 1 and 3, you can see that the trousers themselves look quite similar, even though they're different in shape in some areas. You can see that the waistline is the same, the pleating area and the crumpling area on the bottom is exactly the same, and the weight leans to the left. This is something I try to repeat in the entire collection, so that everything is leaning to the left, and it makes the collection a little bit more cohesive, just this fact alone. As I mentioned, the top print is repeated multiple times, so on look number 1, 3, 5 and 6. Then the top on look number 2, the collar line and the shape of the sleeves is repeated on look number 5. Then the jacket on look number 4 and the print itself and the formality of the print is repeated on look number 6. So there's a lot of connections, a lot of repetition and similarities, even with that giant sculptural backpack, which essentially looks pretty similar to look number 3 trousers themselves. Once we turn to the right, I also did actually side views because my collection is asymmetrical and I felt that would make a little bit more sense. So once you turn to the side, you can see that the shoulder pads are repeated on look number 2, look number 4 and look number 6. The entire collection leans a little bit bottom heavy, but in some areas I tried to raise the hemlines a little bit, and you can see that look number 2 and look number 4 are exactly the same hemline length. Then once you turn to the back, you can see the repetition of a print, which you can see directly on look number 3 and look number 6, where the stamp print is leaning on the butt directly. I like those little scandals, little elements. And also, as I mentioned, on look number 4 and 6, the curvy lines and curvy seams are exactly the same copy paste, because you want to keep some repetition for the sake of your eye being a little bit more relaxed when you're looking at an element you've seen already before. On this side, you can also see a little bit more of skin from look number 5 because there is a very high slit. And on this page, you can see a commercial diffusion range plan that I talked about in the beginning. It doesn't have to be a simplified version of your collection. It can just be inspired with the print, with the shape, but made entirely differently. So I decided to focus on airport leisure travel clothing. And I think the first look is my absolute favorite. I'm so in love with the fact that this oversized drapey hoodie is sort of representing the idea and is embodying the same vibe of my collection in some areas, but then the printed leggings are a way for me to introduce a more sustainable alternative for a commercially viable collection. So with this, I'm showing that you could reuse little pieces of your prints, reuse your fabric scraps and make a pair of leggings, which I'm absolutely in love with and I'm definitely going to be remaking once I'm done with my collection. Second look is quite simple, a creased t-shirt dress, and it is paying an homage to my t-shirt dress that I was wearing when I discovered for inspiration for look number 5. It has a print over top of those folds, and I think that's going to look quite interesting. And tall printed socks, which are repeating the same blank print from the hoodie from look number 1. Look number 3 is repeating the body print in the same shape as the vest coat from look number 4, if you remember, and then the draping trousers with a very soft creamy print. Look number 4 is another one of my favorites, again repeating that blank print as a long turtleneck with a simple t-shirt over top with that word disruption, actually disrupted, as a blank print on top of that t-shirt as well. A very simple, quite straightforward, but it is repeating the cut line of the dress from look number 2 in here, and it has long biker shorts with a stamp print as well, also giving a bit of that homage to look number 2 in the placement of that stamp. The belt bag on this look is inspired by the ginormous oversized backpack, which obviously is not commercially viable, and I like the color combo of that look itself and the logic behind it, that it is for airport travel and typically you would use, I don't know, the belt bag for passports, maybe phones, chargers or something of that nature. Look number 5 is the simplest. It's just a pair of leggings with a body print on top of those, directly taken from look number 6, but a simplified version without that trouser underwear tucking manipulation. And the t-shirt is a very simple, like draping version, sort of a combo of look number 2 and look number 1 from this commercial collection. And the last look in this case is absolutely not a showstopper piece like in a traditional range plan it would be, but it is a repetition of look number 3, but in a more shortened version. So you can see the repetition of a cut line and the quite straightforward repetition of the trousers, but just in a shortened version. And then I love the top because it is that nude body print, just without the sleeves and without the high collar, but with a little bit of a cross out on the bust line, which would be a reference to censorship. I love my commercial diffusion collection. I think I might be actually making it at some point once I'm done with this graduate collection. Making this commercial diffusion was very easy actually. After we chatted with our tutor and she suggested I take the direction of airport leisure travel clothing, it was super straightforward because I already had a bunch of research, I had my prints finished, I had silhouettes done, so I just basically followed my collection and made a simplified version of it without actually leaning towards repeating every look by making a simplified version of it, if that makes sense. If you have any questions, add them down below. I'm definitely going to be happy answering any of those, but if you have any suggestions for future videos, leave them down below as well.
I hope you enjoyed this video. If you're interested, you can access that playlist I talked about in the beginning. I'm going to be leaving that link down below as well. So thank you for watching and stay tuned because I'm going to be talking about about a lot more regarding fashion, design development, and because I'm not graduated yet, you're going to see how that plays out as well. Because I'm going to be sewing my collection in Estonia, I'm going to be filming along the way everything, and if I find that perfect sewing machine and if we get it, I can sew from home. So stay tuned for studio vlogs, which are going to be in my bedroom essentially. So thank you for watching, see you next time, bye!